Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Huo Yuhao heaved a sigh, and he just stood there as he muttered under his breath, "You've really hurt his heart." Shu Yun turned and glared at him. "How have I hurt his heart? What about me? What about my heart?" Huo Yuhao said plainly, "Your appearance was unexpected in the first place. You will know whether or not I am a spy if you calm down and think about it. You've changed your opinion, and now you think I have been sent by the White Tiger Duke. This proves that you understand in your heart that I cannot possibly be a spy. I can tell you very frankly that I have no connection at all to the White Tiger Duke, and I even hate him. As for Luoli, I only think that he has a martial soul with huge potential and talent, but he hasn't been able to unleash it, so I decided to help him a little. Let me ask you a question, princess." "What?" Shu Yun asked doubtfully. Huo Yuhao continued, "There's strength hidden within his martial soul, and this strength hasn't appeared after almost 20 years. Do you think it's that easy to draw out this strength? I've beaten him for more than a month. Why have I only beaten that strength out of him yesterday? Have you thought about that? All right, you can think about that yourself. However, I advise you not to try and reveal my identity. Otherwise, I will leave this place. I only have one aim in joining the army, and that is to defend my empire. You don't have to think too much about my identity, and you can just think of me as a soul master who cultivates independently." Huo Yuhao turned and left after he finished his sentence, and he didn't give Shu Yun any chance to talk. Dawdling explanations would only make this princess even angrier. In the state she was in, she couldn't possibly think rationally, or accept anything that Dai Luoli would have said to explain himself. Huo Yuhao could only use this method of playing it cool, and throw a hit back at her to achieve any effect at all. Furthermore, Huo Yuhao's words were all true, and Dai Luoli did trigger his martial soul's true strength, because he wanted to protect Shu Yun. A contemplative look flowed from Shu Yun's eyes as she watched them leave. Everything that had happened last night played again and again in her mind. She couldn't forget Dai Luoli's eyes yesterday. Yes. How could he possibly fake an expression like that? "Luoli, I'm sorry. I have blamed you wrongly." Shu Yun muttered under her breath. She wanted to chase after him, but couldn't get over her own pride, and she just watched Huo Yuhao and Dai Luoli return to their ranks, as they followed the recruits back for training. He has so many wounds on his body. How painful must that be? The two of them returned to the recruits. All those recruits, along with the other team leaders, stared at them with a completely different expression from before. The bodyguards had slunk away. The two of them had just returned when they were immediately surrounded by the recruits and tossed into the air in the next moment. The two of them had led small Team 1's recruits to defeat the bodyguards. That battle made the blood in these fellows' hearts burn with passion, while Huo Yuhao and Dai Luoli immediately became like heroes to them. Just as the recruits were hollering excitedly and tossing them up and down, Huo Yuhao's mood was originally very high when he suddenly felt his heart tense up for no particular reason. In that moment, he felt as if the world had become black and white, and an indescribable fear instantly spread across his entire body. This sense of fear didn't come from a person or a living being. Instead, it became from an entire region of space. There seemed to be some force from the dark that was suppressing his heart and made him shudder with a fright that came from deep within his soul. This unprecedented situation turned his face ghastly pale in an instant. Something had happened, and something big was about to happen. After Wang Chua sacrificed herself, Huo Yuhao controlled the power of destiny, and this sudden fear gave him an extremely ominous feeling. His eyes seemed to be guided by a mysterious wave of the power of destiny, and he gazed into the distance, as he was still being tossed up and down through the air. The sky suddenly seemed to brighten far into the horizon right at this moment. The flash that suddenly appeared was very intense, and even though it was extremely far away, it managed to catch the attention of all the recruits. Their frolicking stopped, and everyone turned and gazed in that direction. Everyone could see an incandescent sphere of light flickering far beyond the horizon. This radiance was hemispherical, and it gradually expanded outwards, while its light was very intense and dazzling. Many people couldn't help but shift their eyes away after staring straight at the flash for a moment, and nobody dared to continue staring right at it. Only Huo Yuhao's eyes were fixed on that flash from the beginning to the end. Yes, something had happened. The earth trembled faintly in the next moment, and booming sounds that resembled dull thunderclaps rolled forth, and caused the entire army camp to quiver violently. The recruits began to feel waves of dizziness, and some recruits, who were relatively weaker, even fell down on the ground from all those tremors. Zhuang Qian murmured to himself, "What's happening? That direction seems to be where the Northwestern Field Army is stationed." Huo Yuhao and Dai Luoli were back on the ground, and their expressions changed at almost the same time. Dai Luoli applied strength to his legs, and was about to charge forward when Huo Yuhao pulled him back. "Where are you going?" Dai Luoli's voice was quivering a little. "I want to take a look. That's where the Northwestern Field Army is stationed. My father is there." That seems like." Huo Yuhao grabbed his shirt and dragged Dai Luoli in front of him. "Everything has already happened. What can you do even if you head over right now? From this moment onwards, you're not allowed to leave my side. We'll wait until we have more accurate intel before we do anything." Right at this moment, shrill and ear-piercing whistling sounds could be heard ringing out hysterically from the entire 6th Reserve Legion. This was the whistle for an emergency assembly. Large numbers of reserve troops swiftly came out of their tents and assembled from every camp, and the officers got into their respective positions. The entire Reserve Legion was mobilized, and even though they were just the reserves, the quality they displayed was impressive. The order came down very quickly. All reserve troops were to prepare for battle, and that included recruits. Everyone was to pack up and get ready for battle at any moment. Xu Yun was a battalion commander, and her battalion consisted almost entirely of recruits. Huo Yuhao and the 300 recruits were her newest additions. Their battalion of recruits had twice as many people as normal battalions, at 900 soldiers in total. Xu Yun was standing in front of everyone, and her expression was exceptionally black. Huo Yuhao and Dai Luoli could guess what had happened, and she naturally could as well. Xu Yun hollered, "Tang Dong, Dai Luoli, step out." Huo Yuhao pulled Dai Luoli, and they took a few steps forward and saluted her. Xu Yun lowered her voice and said, "From now on, the two of you are promoted as my bodyguards, but your ranks will remain private first class. Stand behind me." She couldn't care about military rules anymore at a time like this. The recruits hadn't even finished their basic military training, and they were officially not allowed to become bodyguards for a battalion commander. She was distraught with anxiety and confusion, however, and she needed a mainstay at a time like this. What she didn't know was that this order that she had just given was the wisest decision she had ever made in her entire life. Huo Yuhao and Dai Luoli stepped behind Xu Yun. At a time like this, Huo Yuhao wasn't worried about Dai Luoli making a move by himself. Xu Yun's presence was enough to calm him down a little. Xu Yun continued giving orders, "Everyone, return to your bunks, pack and organize your things. Come back and assemble at the military drill ground afterward, and stay where you are to rest. After that, wait for further orders. Disperse." The soldiers returned to their respective destinations, but she kept Huo Yuhao and Dai Luoli behind. The Sun Moon Empire must have made their move," Xu Yun spoke as she fumed with rage between gritted teeth. Dai Luoli didn't have to pretend. His expression was black, and he nodded forcefully. "They've invaded us without declaring war. Furthermore, they've used soul tools which possess great power. I wonder how the front lines are doing." "My father," Xu Yun interjected, "the White Tiger Duke is a titled Doluor, so he'll be fine. I wonder what class those soul tools are to give us such sensations. My only wish now is that the front lines haven't suffered excessively heavy losses. The army has already sent scouts to find out what's happening, and they should return quickly with definite intel." Huo Yuhao's expression was solemn. Dai Luoli and Xu Yun weren't knowledgeable enough, and they didn't know enough to judge how forceful that explosion was. He was a gifted student from Shrek Academy's Soul Tool department, so how could he not be able to judge? The feeling he got from that explosion's force could only be achieved with one type of soul tool. That soul tool could only be a Class 9 stationary soul cannon shell. They were almost 300 kilometers away from where the explosion had occurred, and they could still clearly see, hear, and feel the explosion's effects from such a distance away. Huo Yuhao had only seen an explosion like this once before, and that was when he had triggered an explosion in that underground warehouse within Radiant City. That apocalyptic spectacle was deeply imprinted in his memory. This meant the explosion that had just occurred didn't come from just a single Class 9 stationary soul cannon shell. It was likely that more than one had been used. The Sun Moon Empire had held themselves back for more than half a year. Were they about to launch a full-scale invasion? The timing of their invasion was at least 6 months earlier than Huo Yuhao had predicted. The Star Luo Empire became the Sun Moon Empire's first target after launching an invasion. Huo Yuhao heaved a faint sigh inside. He felt very helpless and exasperated. The Star Luo Empire was too far behind the Sun Moon Empire in terms of their research with soul tools. Otherwise, with the intense energy undulations that Class 9 stationary soul cannon shells gave off, those shells should have been intercepted at the border. However, it seemed the Star Luo Empire were unsuccessful at intercepting those shells, and the Sun Moon Empire managed to detonate their stationary shells near the armies stationed near the Star Luo Empire's borders. The Star Luo Empire had probably sustained heavy losses this time. Dai Luoli wasn't the only one concerned about the White Tiger Duke. They didn't have much to pack. Their personal belongings were all stored inside storage-type soul tools that they kept on their bodies all the time, while they were wearing all their military equipment, such as their uniforms, leather armor, number plates, and weapons. As for other items like their bedsheets and whatnot, they did not pack those burdensome things. The booms that resembled dull thunderclaps continued ringing out in the distance. Even though the light wasn't as bright as before, everyone could hear those dense explosions from several hundred kilometers away. It wasn't hard to imagine how intense the battle at the border was. The entire 6th Reserve Legion fitted themselves out within an hour, and everyone waited on the military drill ground. Even their tents and whatnot had been packed, and everyone was prepared to support the front lines at a moment's notice. Scouts streamed in and out of the army camp continuously, and everyone could tell from their anxious and worried expressions that the battle wasn't going very well. The officers who were at least battalion commanders were quickly called up for a meeting, while Shiyun brought Huo Yuhao and Dai Luoli, who had become her impromptu bodyguards, along with her. Shiyun had no experience on the battlefield at all, and she was overcome with anxiety and confusion at a time like this. She wasn't just a battalion commander, she was also a princess. This war was connected to her nation's safety and survival, so how could she not be worried? Huo Yuhao and Dai Luoli arrived at the corps commander's tent, but they were only bodyguards, so they could only wait outside. Huo Yuhao was worried, but he didn't use his spiritual power to sense what was happening inside. If there was a powerful soul master inside, he would be in trouble if that soul master discovered his spiritual undulations. The meeting was strangely very brief, and Shiyun hurriedly rushed out after less than 10 minutes. "Quick, follow me back to the battalion." She quickly got onto her horse as she spoke, and her 2 bodyguards could only jog along as they followed behind her. "Yun, battalion commander." Dai Luoli was about to call her Yuna, but Huo Yuhao glared at him, and only then did he recall the method that Huo Yuhao had taught him. Dai Luoli hurriedly adjusted his expression, and put on a very serious appearance. Shiyun snapped around and stared at him. She didn't wait for him to ask, and said straightforwardly, "The front lines have been utterly crushed. The Northwestern Field Army has given the order for us to enter the city immediately, and to build our defenses around Imperial Radiant City. We are to wait for the retreating army and rendezvous with them." "What? The front lines have been crushed?" Dai Luoli blurted out. The Star Luo Empire had spent thousands of years developing their defenses at the western borders. They had relied on the Mingdo mountain range as a natural stronghold, and their fortifications could be said to be impenetrable. Shuyun's pretty face was a little pale. "Yes, the front lines have been decimated. The Sun Moon Empire's invasion came without warning, and they detonated several Class 9 stationary soul cannon shells on the relatively weaker regions of the Mingdo mountain range, and created an enormous gap. They mobilized 4 Soul Engineer Legions to launch continuous assaults on our army. The Soul Engineer Legion's continuous blanketing onslaught forced the Northwestern Field Army back, and led the Sun Moon Empire's great army to charge through the gap in the mountains. 1 Class 9 stationary shell landed in the Northwestern Field Army's central region, and the soldiers on the front lines have sustained heavy losses, with many lives lost and many more injured. We can't hold on any longer, so we're retreating." "What about my father?" Dai Luoli asked worriedly. Shiyun answered, "Marshal Dai is leading the field army to defend against the invaders with their full strength, but the Sun Moon Empire's assault is very ferocious. Their invading army isn't very large, but they've mobilized 3 out of the 5 fingers of the hand that protects the nation. They've come too quickly and too suddenly, and they are way too destructive." Huo Yuhao lowered his voice and asked, "Battalion commander, how many soldiers are stationed along our western borders?" Shiyun replied, the Northwestern Field Army is the main defense for our western borders, while the Western Field Army supports them. The Northwestern Field Army controls 11 legions, while the Western Field Army consists of 8 legions. Our fighting strength stands at 80,000 soldiers. Other than that, we have 200,000 auxiliary soldiers, and our total strength is almost 400,000. 7 cities contain reserve legions behind the borders, and our reserve legions have about 200,000 soldiers. Huo Yuhao understood the situation as he listened to her. The Star Luo Empire's western borders had about 600,000 soldiers stationed there, and of them, there were about 300,000 fighting soldiers. It was a very large number. Furthermore, the 2 field armies stationed at the western borders undoubtedly possessed the greatest fighting strength within the entire military, while they also had the best equipment. In the end, the Sun Moon Empire was the Star Luo Empire's greatest enemy. At least the Zhuge divine crossbow cannons that the Star Luo Empire had purchased from the Tang sect had been transferred to the Western Front. Under such circumstances, war had suddenly erupted at the borders, yet the Star Luo Empire's defenses were still torn apart. The Star Luo Empire's strongest army, the Northwestern Field Army, had been utterly crushed. It wasn't hard to imagine how shocking the Sun Moon Empire's blow was. The 6th Reserve Legion was quickly mobilized, and they swiftly entered Imperial Radiant City, along with their armaments. Intel streamed in continuously back and forth from Imperial Radiant City and the front lines. The city's gates were immediately sealed after the 4th and 6th Reserve Legions entered the city, and everyone was on high alert. Many soldiers were deployed to protect the city's most important granaries and armories. The atmosphere was unprecedentedly tense, and the air was so heavy and dense that it seemed as though it could drip with water. Huo Yuhao and the others belonged to the 3rd Battalion of the 6th Reserve Legion, which was part of the 7th Division. They were arranged on the eastern side of the city. They had too many recruits, so if the fighting did reach the city, the Western Front would be the first place to be assaulted. Therefore, the recruits were deployed near the eastern side of the city. Xu Yun went for another meeting before she returned to her provisional battalion with a gloomy face, while she arranged for Huo Yuhao and Dai Luoli to wait inside the room with her. "What's the situation, Battalion Commander?" Dai Luoli asked worriedly. This matter was closely related to his father's safety, so there was no way he couldn't be anxious. Xu Yun's face was filled with concern and anxiety. "The situation is terrible. The number of dead or injured at the front lines is still unclear, but we know that the White Tiger Duke has led his personal soldiers to cover the rear so that most of his army can withdraw from the Sun Moon Empire's range. The front lines have sustained severe losses, while the Western Field Army has been hit with a destructive assault at the same time. The Sun Moon Empire has used another Class 9 stationary Soul Cannon shell, as well. Our conservative estimate is that the Sun Moon Empire has used more than 6 Class 9 stationary cannon shells this time." Huo Yuhao drew a cold breath when he heard her words. Because he knew how powerful stationary Soul Cannon shells were, he could understand how frightening their destructive power was. Dai Luoli's face was ghastly pale, but his eyes suddenly became determined and resolute. "I'm going to look for my father. I'm leaving, Xu Yun." With that, he turned and began to walk out. Huo Yuhao grabbed his shoulder and heartlessly pulled him back. "You're not going anywhere. It's useless even if you go, so you're going to stay here and do nothing. Do you think that you, a soul elder that doesn't even have 4 soul rings, can turn the tide even if you go to the front lines?" Dai Luoli's eyes were bloodshot. "I can't just wait here. My father is fighting with his life for our country's survival. I am his son, and even if I have to die, I will bleed with him and die valiantly on the battlefield. We have enlisted in the army to defend our nation. I am a soul master, so what will I be if I wait here with the recruits?" Huo Yuhao slapped Dai Luoli right across his face and sent him crumpling to the ground. He said coldly, "Your intentions are good and you're very brave, but that's brainless bravery. So what if you're a soul master? Do you really think you can get out of the city when the city gates are sealed shut? Or are you intending to expose your identity as the White Tiger Duke's son and embarrass your father at the same time? You should hate yourself because you're not strong enough and can't help him at a time like this. If you have sufficient determination, you should use that on cultivation. Imperial Radiant City is positioned behind the front lines, and once they can't hold on any longer, the army will have to retreat through Imperial Radiant City. Do something you can afford to do with your strength, and is far better and more useful than throwing away your life like that. Perhaps Dailuoli was used to being beaten by Huo Yuhao, but he wasn't furious because of this slap. He got back to his feet, his expression grave and stern, but he said nothing. Xu Yun sat down on a chair by the side. Her eyes were scattered, and she was beside herself with panic. Faced with an all-out war of such a scale, the little princess was completely lost with worry and panic. Huo Yuhao glanced at the sky outside. He lowered his voice and said, "The two of you, stay here and cultivate. I'll take a look at the front lines, and bring first-hand intel back to you guys." "You're going?" Dailuoli and Xu Yun stared at him at the same time. Huo Yuhao walked up before Dailuoli, and his cold eyes suddenly became warm. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Call me your older brother." "Older brother?" Dailuoli called out subconsciously. Huo Yuhao smiled faintly and said, "Stay here and don't go anywhere. I'll come back to look for you very soon." With that, Huo Yuhao vanished into thin air soundlessly in front of Dailuoli. Dailuoli stared at the space in front of him with widened eyes and slack jaw. He didn't feel any soul power undulations from Huo Yuhao, and only his martial soul, which had finished its mutation, seemed to feel something. Xu Yun's eyes were equally frozen. "Now I firmly believe that he wasn't sent by your father." "Why?" Dailuoli asked subconsciously. Xu Yun answered, "If your father had sent him here, he wouldn't have beat you so cruelly. However, you seem to be a lot stronger than before he beat you up." Huo Yuhao surged into the sky in a flash after he left the army camp. He unleashed his imitation, and his entire being seemed to integrate into the air. His spiritual power spread out in all directions like an enormous web, instantly blanketing the entire city. Huo Yuhao possessed spiritual power that astonished even the beast god, Di Qian. Only spiritual power at such a level could possess such prowess. Huo Yuhao couldn't help but shake his head when he made a brief survey of the city. Imperial Radiant City didn't have a single aerial surveillance soul tool, and there were only several soul power detectors on the battlements. Imperial Radiant City's defenses were a far cry from the Sun Moon Empire's Sunrise City back then, the result of the Star Luo Empire lagging behind in industrial standards. He didn't know how much longer the Star Luo Empire could hold on this time. He continued contemplating as he started to move, transforming into a beam of flowing light and surging towards the west. Huo Yuhao left Imperial Radiant City's borders and put his butterfly wings on, his speed rising exponentially as he infused soul power into his wings. Huo Yuhao quickly saw the defeated soldiers, who were retreating from the front lines. They were truly and utterly crushed. Large amounts of soldiers were retreating from the western front with their heads hanging dispiritedly, crestfallen, while many others were injured. Even their formations seemed a little messy and disorganized. How did this happen? Huo Yuhao could tell from his training that the Star Luo Empire had very solid foundations, and even their recruits were controlled with strict military discipline. Why were the defeated soldiers so dispirited? Huo Yuhao landed quietly on the ground and merged himself into the defeated army. He was dressed like a normal soldier in the first place, and he discovered from the other soldiers that the Sun Moon Empire's sudden assault was a lot more ferocious than he had imagined. The Star Luo Empire's aerial surveillance was simply too weak, to the point where the Sun Moon Empire managed to transport powerful individuals through their western borders in different batches. They assaulted the Star Luo Empire in full force, and after their Class 9 stationary soul cannon shells wreaked havoc with their frightening power, these powerful individuals rushed into the army camps that were sent into disarray. They focused on killing officers and creating even more chaos, and they caused the entire Northwestern Field Army to descend into utter chaos and confusion. If not for the White Tiger Duke's strict handling of his soldiers, and the fact that he had formidable prowess at controlling his army, the Northwestern Field Army would have sustained even heavier losses. The front lines had already lost about 70,000 people. According to the defeated soldiers, beams of powerful light rained down from the sky continuously after that terrifying explosion occurred, and decimated the Star Luo Empire's stronghold on the mountaintop. Afterward, large numbers of soul engineers flooded into the Ming-Do mountain range and massacred everyone. This was clearly a fighting style where top-tier fighting strength was used to open a path. Furthermore, with the Soul Engineer Legion's ability to fly, the Sun Moon Empire's aerial army had an absolute advantage. The Sun Moon Empire had complete air supremacy, and they had used it to great advantage. The Star Luo Empire always knew that they were lagging behind the Sun Moon Empire in terms of soul tools, but only after this all-out war had erupted did they understand how big this rift was. Yes, this rift was truly far too big. Huo Yuhao returned to his journey after obtaining that information. He understood that with the frightening power of soul tools, the defense mechanisms in traditional wars of the past were far from enough to withstand the Sun-Moon Empire's assault. The Sun-Moon Empire had come prepared, and the Star Luo Empire was in deep trouble after they lost the Mingdo mountain range, which was their first line of defense. This defeat was likely to be impossible to turn around. Huo Yuhao didn't take long to fly over 200 kilometers. Huo Yuhao could sense intense soul power undulations that were rippling and exploding from a distance. The sky was beginning to darken, and flashes of varying colors that bloomed and flickered continuously on the borders were thus even more obvious. He quickly noticed what had happened to the Mingdo mountain range. There was an enormous gap in the Mingdo mountain range. This gap had a very strange, extremely sinister shape, and was burned black. It was evidently caused by the frightening explosive force of Class 9 stationary soul cannon shells bombarding the mountains. Huo Yuhao could see from a long distance away that large numbers of soldiers from the Sun-Moon Empire were streaming into the Star Luo Empire's borders through this gap. The Star Luo Empire's defensive perimeter had been utterly crushed on all fronts. But what about the White Tiger Duke and the others? Could it be that the White Tiger Duke and his personal guards had been slaughtered? The remnants of the Star Luo Empire's armies were battered and bruised. Voluminous aerial surveillance and land surveillance soul tools dotted the sky roughly 10 kilometers away, while soul tool fronts and positions constructed by soul engineers were gradually taking shape on the ground. Brilliant flashes that flickered from time to time slowly disappeared at the same time. The Northwestern Field Army's front had been completely lost after just half a day. Huo Yuhao gulped as he hovered in midair, even he was a little lost. That was the Star Luo Empire's most formidable fighting strength. Were they actually crushed that simply? Huo Yuhao couldn't tell which soul engineer legions were stationed beneath him, and he closed his eyes as he withdrew every inch of spiritual power that he had let out. He was under the cover of imitation, and even aerial surveillance soul tools couldn't detect his presence. Only thermal detectors could possibly discover his presence. A rose-gold vertical eye gradually surfaced behind Huo Yuhao's back, and his head glowed at the same time as a rose-gold wheel of light appeared behind his head. The aura of destiny undulated outward at the same time. His spiritual detection's range was ultimately limited, and his spiritual power wasn't as powerful as that of the evil-eyed tyrant king, who could reach 500 kilometers away with spiritual detection. When Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection reached a range of 10,000 meters, his accuracy would be greatly reduced. Furthermore, the battlefield at the border was so large, it was clearly impossible for him to find the White Tiger Duke with spiritual detection. Therefore, he opted for another method. He wanted to try a method that he felt he could have used a long time ago, but had never tried before. He wanted to try to use destiny to guide him. This wasn't a soul skill. Huo Yuhao possessed the power of destiny, and he was using his heart to feel, sensing for palpitations that stemmed from destiny. The vertical eye behind Huo Yuhao was withdrawn after a moment, and his eyes turned towards the north. Something in the dark was guiding him, that the White Tiger Duke should be to the north. He turned around and sped up once again, racing towards the north. The Northwestern Field Army was not just stationed at the western borders, they were also near the Heavenly Soul Empire at the same time. They could reach the Heavenly Soul Empire's borders if they traveled less than 500 kilometers north from their position. The White Tiger Duke was actually taking what was left of his forces and retreating towards the north. Why was he doing that? Huo Yuhao flew forward rapidly with some doubts in mind. His thoughts were slowly ironed out, and his expression immediately grew ugly. However, traces of admiration tinged his eyes. The White Tiger Duke didn't retreat toward the east, but toward the north. There could only be one reason for that. The White Tiger Duke was one of the main targets for the Sun-Moon Empire's sudden onslaught. The Sun-Moon Empire would attempt to take him down at all costs, so their most formidable fighting strength should have been directed at him. He retreated to the north to draw this force away, to give the Star Luo Empire's defeated armies time to retreat. The Sun-Moon Empire's soul engineer legions were still flying through the air, and the threat and damage they could cause to normal soldiers were far too heavy and severe. Even though the hatred that Huo Yuhao felt towards the White Tiger Duke wasn't reduced by much, he still admired the White Tiger Duke's bravery and heroism. He was the marshal, but he wasn't the first to retreat, and he placed himself in grave danger so that he could buy time for his armies to retreat. This deed wasn't something that normal people could perform. Huo Yuhao released his spiritual power, at the same time, as he continued flying towards the north. Indeed, there were many scars and traces of battle left behind on the ground. Some were left behind by soul tools, and others were left behind by soul masters and the armies. Huo Yuhao saw corpses from time to time, and he could tell from these traces that the battle was violent and vigorous, but there weren't that many people fighting. The total number couldn't be more than 10,000 people, but this group had to be the most elite members from both sides. The Star Luo Empire had few soul engineers and soul tools, but their numbers of true soul masters wasn't something the Sun Moon Empire could compare to. There was at least one soul master legion in the Northwestern Field Army, with at least 1,000 people that consisted entirely of true soul masters. Even though they weren't the White Tiger's personal guards, they only listened to the White Tiger Duke's orders and commands. The Star Luo Empire had a total of 10 such soul master legions. Unfortunately, these soul master legions were far too powerful, to the point where the Star Luo Empire's royal family didn't dare to hand them over to the White Tiger Duke for him to command. The entire Northwestern Field Army had only been assigned one such soul master legion. Huo Yuhao couldn't fly that quickly, because he was surveying the traces of battle on the ground, but the good thing was that he knew he was going in the right direction. The further he flew, the more he understood how much the Sun Moon Empire wanted to kill the White Tiger Duke. Huo Yuhao could tell from the corpses on the ground that there were at least 2 soul engineer legions chasing down the White Tiger Duke and his soldiers. Furthermore, these 2 legions were members of the hand that protects the nation. Huo Yuhao had seen one of them before. That legion had trapped Huo Yuhao and the others, which had ultimately resulted in Wang Chua sacrificing herself for him. That legion was the Evil Tyrant Legion, and from what the soul engineers, who had been killed, were wearing, the other legion should be the Terraclaw Soul Engineer Legion. These 2 legions had top-tier equipment. They were beast-rank soul engineer legions. They were equipped with large amounts of top-tier soul tools, and their average fighting strength was equal to that of a Class 4 soul engineer or higher. Furthermore, they were exceptionally adept at teamwork and cooperation. Huo Yuhao flew for another hour before he could faintly see waves of flickering light in the distance. These lights were flickering at an incredible rate. It wasn't hard to see that the battle was extremely intense. Huo Yuhao found the right direction, so he no longer had to determine his destination. He hurriedly accelerated as much as he could and flew in that direction. He could see shadows and figures flickering with beams of light in the air over the horizon. This group was mainly split into 2 groups. The first group belonged to the Evil Tyrant Soul Engineer Legion, whose flying-type soul tool sparkled with blue light, and the other group belonged to the Terraclaw Soul Engineer Legion, whose flying-type soul tools flickered with dark golden light. These 2 Soul Engineer Legions were spread out in mid-air, and were maintaining their Soul Engineer front in the air just like that. A blue dome protected the Evil Tyrant Legion, while a dark gold dome protected the Terraclaw Legion. Huo Yuhao could see that the soul power from these domes came from a spike-shaped soul tool at the tips of their flying-type soul tools. Everyone was releasing soul power from this soul tool, and their soul power congregated and transformed into these enormous domes. The ratio of corpses that Huo Yuhao saw on the way here was heavily in favor of soul engineers. There were far too few soul engineers who had perished. That number stood at a little over 10, while the Star Luo Empire had left behind far too many corpses. The White Tiger Duke's personal guards had suffered heavy losses and injuries, and many individuals who should be powerful soul masters were killed in action. The 2 soul engineer legions that were hovering in mid-air were firing thick soul rays towards the ground, again and again. They weren't firing among themselves or at their own discretion. The soul tools they were using seemed to have a combined effect. 3 to 5 people formed one team, and every soul ray they fired would cause intense explosions on the ground beneath them. The situation on the ground was far more tragic and disastrous compared to the soul engineers. Huo Yuhao possessed necromantic abilities, and as he reached out with his spiritual power, he could already feel many spiritual undulations on the ground. Those spirits belonged to the dead. Compared to the 2 distinct domes in the sky, there were also domes on the ground, and they were also used for defense, but they could only be described as multicolored. There were almost 100 different kinds of light, and the situation seemed very scattered and disorganized. It was clear that the Soul Masters were the main defensive force on the ground. This video will end here.